How could you possibly think to kick my parents out of the house? Her husband wondered. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. They spoke to me like I was a servant in my own home, the wife tried to justify herself. Couldn't you have just put up with it? They came to visit for only a short time. Your parents traveled from the other side of the city, and you didn't show them at least minimal hospitality and respect. This is just shameful. Robert clutched his head. Guests are usually invited. They shouldn't show up like a bolt from the blue. Betty entered the argument, not even considering that she was talking about her husband's parents, who were the closest and dearest people to Robert. I didn't invite them. Besides, they knew you weren't home. So why did they come? Instead of judging other people's actions, you should start with yourself. For example, you could have shown at least basic courtesy, and there wouldn't have been any problem. I treated them just fine. Betty didn't want to give in. They didn't like that we only had black tea, and she wanted green. If my mom only drinks green tea, what can I do? She could have gone to the store since it's just a 2-minute walk from our house. Or did you just not want to leave your parents alone in the apartment? Robert asked his wife. How could you even think of that? Betty was almost in tears. I went to the store and bought green tea, but unfortunately, it turned out to be the wrong brand that Dolores drinks. She said she wouldn't even touch it. Although I clearly remember how she named that brand when listing the green teas she likes. Well, maybe she just mixed it up. Or you didn't hear her correctly. Robert tried to find an explanation for the situation. You should have asked her to repeat the name, written it down, and gone to the store. Those are basic actions. Betty looked at Robert resentfully but didn't reply. Meanwhile, he continued. You're making a tragedy out of nothing. Fine, if they visited us regularly, I'd at least understand that you were just tired of their visits. But they came for only the second time since the wedding. The second time. Robert collapsed onto the couch in exhaustion. I did everything to please them, believe me. But the tea wasn't the end of it. On the contrary, that was just the beginning. Arnold said he was very hungry and asked me to make him dinner. By that time, the food I had planned to save for the evening was ready, but your parents said it was absolutely unsuitable for them. Yes, very strange, Robert was surprised. See for yourself, Betty offered and handed him a note on which Arnold left her something like a dinner preparation guide. Robert even whistled. Did you really prepare all of this? Of course not. Betty replied indignantly. I can't imagine how to make something like that. That's the level of a chef from an expensive restaurant. I can easily make home-cooked meals, but this requires special qualifications. Robert began to pace the room thoughtfully. Well, we've settled the food issue, he said after a pause. But what happened next? Mom said you spoke very rudely to them and then kicked them out of the apartment. Was it really about the green tea and Dad's culinary requests? There was a reason, Betty replied, frowning. After I didn't make the dish they ordered, they still drank the tea. I won't even mention the expression on your mom's face. Maybe you just imagined it, Robert suggested. Don't make me out to be a hysteric, Betty said reproachfully. When they finished the tea, I even sighed to myself, hoping they had calmed down a bit. No such luck. Dolores started talking about renovations. What renovations? Robert asked, surprised. Well, they're planning to renovate their apartment. Didn't they tell you about it? Betty asked. Strange, her husband said. They probably just got caught up in things and forgot, he suggested. So what's the deal with the renovations? Oh. Betty replied angrily. According to your mom, I'm obligated to help them. Did Mom ask you to help with material choices? Robert guessed. I wish, Betty exclaimed. At first, just like you, I thought she wanted my professional recommendations. You told them that I'm a designer, right? She smiled sadly and looked at her husband. It was about something else, the wife confirmed. At first, I genuinely wanted to help them. I even offered to create a design project for them and pick out the necessary materials. I wouldn't have charged them a penny. After all, they are your parents. Well, that's fine, but I still don't get the essence of the problem. Robert looked questioningly at his wife. The problem started later. Betty began to explain, her expression showing that the conversation was difficult for her. Designer, Dolores scoffed disdainfully. Those are people who've taken a 2-month course and then think they're great creators. Arnold smirked meaningfully. Why a course? Betty said, offended. I'm a certified specialist. I graduated from a college of international standing. I can help you with your interior design, but first, you need to tell me all your preferences in detail. Based on that, I'll create a design project, and we'll pick out furniture, textiles, and decide on the color scheme together. The daughter-in-law began to list. Betty offered her help without ulterior motives. She didn't expect that it would melt the ice that had formed between her and her in-laws over time. But maybe they would at least start communicating like normal people. However, Betty was mistaken. College? Dolores asked through gritted teeth. I already figured out that you're uneducated, practically self-taught. Why self-taught? The daughter-in-law didn't understand. I already told you I have a college diploma. Not just any college, she began to explain about one of the most prestigious in the industry. It collaborates widely with international design firms, and students regularly have internships, including abroad. I, however, did my internship in our country, but I was one of the best in my class, Betty tried to clarify. But, Arnold mumbled, skeptical. In our family, everyone has higher education, Dolores stated firmly, as if hammering each word home. Me, Arnold, Robert's brother, John, and his wife Amanda, all of us. Robert, for your information, graduated with a degree and worked in several countries. A satisfied smile spread across Dolores's face. It was clear that she took pride in her son and his achievements, placing them first. And what's a college anyway? She concluded dismissively. Maybe in your time, a college was something like a community college. I can't judge, Betty replied. But now everything is different. A secondary vocational education is valued just as much as higher education, and in some areas, it even surpasses it. Besides, not everyone has to study at universities. Yes, I could have gone on to further studies after college, but I got married. And now you'll be a housewife. Dolores shot back. That's your ceiling. Unbelievable. Who can I tell this to? They'll laugh at me. Meet the wife of our son. He found her in a dumpster, and now she's like a living girlfriend. Betty, who had been struggling to drink her tea until now, choked. Why are you speaking like that? She was deeply offended. I don't consider myself a nobody. First and foremost, I am a person, do you hear me? And I won't let anyone treat me that way. Just look at how sensitive we are. Dolores burst into laughter. Don't worry, I contribute to the family as much as Robert does. Betty started to justify herself for some reason. I work and earn a decent salary, which I bring home. I have never lived in a dumpster, and I don't plan to, no matter how much you might want that. And what is the size of your contribution to the family budget? I'm embarrassed to ask, Dolores said in a sing-song voice. Then don't ask, Betty replied sharply. It's none of your business. Just look at her!" Dolores exclaimed. "Arnold, what do you think of this?" "I don't know what contribution she's talking about," Arnold began, narrowing his eyes slyly. "But she behaves terribly with guests. She couldn't even offer us a proper dinner. Does my son have to make do with simple food and fried eggs?" "I see nothing wrong with that," the daughter-in-law unnecessarily entered into a pointless argument. "I've been cooking well since childhood. No one has ever complained about my dishes. Yes, it's simple home-cooked food, but it's delicious and healthy. I'm sure you wouldn't refuse it either." Dolores grimaced as if she had heard something unpleasant. From the food, then, she began to mimic her daughter-in-law. "Where on earth did my boy find this country bumpkin?" "I'm not an object for you to find," Betty protested again. "Robert and I met at the airport. I was returning from my parents' place, and he had just flown in from an internship." "Well, you probably remember this story already," Betty said wearily. "That was a rhetorical question," Dolores said with a smirk, meaning it doesn't require an answer. "But yes, how would a college graduate know that? If you had a proper education, I wouldn't have to spell out every word for you. So you should understand how far behind you are compared to Robert. If having a higher education makes people cruel and arrogant, then I don't need it," Betty replied proudly, raising her chin. "That's something new," Dolores said sarcastically, turning to her husband. "Only fools consider higher education a relic of the past, while for all normal people," she emphasized the word normal, "its value is obvious. But I'm not going to waste my time explaining something that is already clear." Betty was silent, trying her best to hold back her emotions. The last thing she wanted was to say something to her mother-in-law that she would later regret. "So, getting back to the renovation topic," Dolores continued, as if nothing had happened, "were you serious?" "Yes," Betty replied. It was unbearably difficult for her to communicate with her mother-in-law, but she still hoped to engage in a constructive dialogue. "If you need my help, I can offer professional advice," she suggested. It seemed that when in-laws tested their daughter-in-law in action, they would change their negative opinion. Perhaps they would see her as a professional and even take back their hurtful words. "Advice?" Dolores asked sarcastically. "We don't seek advice from uneducated people. That's just outrageous. So what do you want from me?" Betty didn't understand. "Right now, the market for design services offers professionals for every taste and budget," she inserted, trying to stay calm. "We know that." "No need to lecture us uninvited," Arnold added, chiming in. Betty stared at her in-laws, but still didn't understand what exactly they wanted from her. "We need a person for a different job," Dolores finally condescended to explain. "We can only trust the renovation to competent specialists who truly know what they're doing." "And what am I supposed to do?" the daughter-in-law asked. "You'll be responsible for cleaning. While people are doing the renovations, you can keep things tidy, right? This doesn't require any special knowledge, just collect the trash, wipe the floors at the end of the day. You can handle that, can't you?" her mother-in-law asked mockingly. "Are you saying you want me to perform the duties of a laborer?" Betty realized belatedly. "Do you want to hire me in that capacity?" "Why jump to hire?" Dolores feigned surprise. "You could help us out for free, as a kind of family favor. Plus, it's not like you'd have to do anything complicated, just clean. I'm sure your knowledge and skills from college will be enough for that. Or am I wrong?" Her father-in-law poured more oil on the fire. Betty stared in shock at Dolores and Arnold. Did they really not understand the absurdity of their proposal? She felt already exhausted and couldn't find the right words to respond with dignity. They perceived her silence as hesitation and decided to speed up the process. Of course, if you want to earn some money, we can pay you. Dolores made her advantageous proposal. We can't offer much. It's not like that's a specialized skill. Just keep in mind, sweetheart, Arnold added, we will be strict about asking you to do things. We don't tolerate lazy people in any task. I don't need anything from you, Betty said quietly. She took a deep breath and, looking at her mother-in-law, continued, I ask you to leave immediately. Robert is not home right now, and I don't have time for empty conversations with you. If you don't need advice on interior design, then I can't help you. Please leave. She raised her voice, but her in-laws remained seated at the kitchen table. So you're refusing us? Dolores widened her eyes. You're kicking us out? Arnold was angry. I wonder how Robert will react to this. I don't think he'll be thrilled. His wife has refused to help his parents. What is this world coming to? I'm not refusing to help you. Betty was beside herself with her in-laws' audacity. I can't sacrifice my time for your whims. Arnold cut her off. And we wouldn't trust you with anything serious anyway. Who knows what the outcome might be? There are plenty of websites now with service offers from different specialists. You can easily find the right person for your needs there. Still, finish up, Betty, we don't need your advice, her mother-in-law grumbled dissatisfiedly. Then leave, Betty repeated, pointing to the door. I'm not going to be your servant. You little brat. Have you thought about Robert? Dolores threw at her as she stood at the door. Don't worry, Betty reassured her. Your son is already old enough to handle this situation and draw the right conclusions. Quite bold, aren't you? Her father-in-law asked. We'll see how you sing a different tune when Robert shamefully kicks you out after he finds out you threw us out. Don't worry, I'll tell him everything myself, Betty declared, closing the door behind them. They spoke to me as if I were nothing. In their eyes, I'm not capable of doing any other work except cleaning, Betty sobbed to her husband. Don't cry, please don't, Robert comforted her. I'm very surprised by my parents' tactless behavior. Believe me, I'm really embarrassed right now. Is it because your wife doesn't have a higher education? Betty asked. No, of course not, Robert couldn't hold back a smile. It's because they spoke to you in that tone. No one dares to offend my wife, got it? He hugged Betty even tighter. Don't worry, I'll make sure they come begging for your forgiveness, just wait and see. The next day, Robert invited his parents over. They thought their son wanted to make amends for his wife's rudeness. However, the in-laws hoped that not only Betty would apologize, but Robert as well. So, they put on their saddest faces. Why did you invite us, son, to a house where we aren't welcome? Dolores began in a mournful voice when Robert opened the door for them. You should have tamed your little milkmaid, Arnold chimed in. She practically lunged at us. Betty, sitting the table at the time, merely grimaced. She didn't like her husband's plan, but he said he wanted to resolve this unpleasant situation. Robert winked at her, and she felt a little brighter. I hope he knows what he's doing, she thought to herself. Finally, they all entered the room where a beautifully set table awaited. The aromas of delicious food wafted through the air. Mom, Dad, we're glad you came, Robert began in a cheerful voice. We have great news for you. Not this. Dolores nearly shouted. For heaven's sake, don't tell me you're expecting a baby. Oh, then I would definitely be on cloud 9, Robert replied, adding, but no, this is about something else. I feel like a weight has been lifted from my heart, said his mother-in-law, addressing her husband. With young people, it's always like this. First, they promise joyful news, and we end up with a village bumpkin for a daughter-in-law. Then they promise to surprise us, and we get a brood of grandchildren. Calm down already, her father-in-law suddenly interrupted her. Let's hear what our son has to say. Thank you, Dad, Robert said gratefully, looking at him. So, I have to tell you the truth. He deliberately paused and looked carefully at his parents. They stared at him, clearly eager to hear more. Honestly, it's not easy for me to make this confession. Robert approached the table, poured himself a glass of mineral water, and downed it in one gulp. The parents froze with their cups in hand, their anxiety growing by the second. The thing is, Robert finally began to speak, I didn't finish college and didn't get my diploma. What do you mean didn't get? Dolores asked in a trembling voice. Son, we didn't understand anything. Please explain again, Arnold requested. All right, Robert agreed. I couldn't continue my studies abroad. I was expelled from my program in disgrace, and I didn't complete any internship as a result. This can't be true. Dolores looked very confused. Are you trying to play a trick on us? This isn't a funny joke, added his father. Unfortunately, it's true, Robert confirmed. Wait, I held your diploma in my hands. I don't understand anything. Arnold exclaimed in alarm. My diploma is a skillfully made forgery and nothing more, Robert stated. By the way, it cost me quite a bit. But what wouldn't I do to make my parents happy? But what about your position? His father continued, refusing to calm down. They wouldn't have hired you if they had doubts about your professional competence, right? Well, no one doubts my professional competence, Robert replied, laughing. It's just that my job has nothing to do with having a diploma, Robert answered calmly. Son, what will you do when the truth comes out? His mother asked in a fallen voice. What will happen when they find out at your job that your diploma isn't real? Most likely, I'll get fired, the son replied without hesitation. Dolores clutched her heart and leaned back against the couch. Arnold immediately began fussing around her, pouring her some water. Dolores took a couple of sips and, catching her breath, asked the next question. Robert, you spent 2 whole years abroad. If you didn't study at a university there, then what did you do? I worked, Robert replied shortly and discreetly winked at Betty. Betty looked at her husband in surprise. This was the first time she had heard his story about the fake diploma. Was he telling the truth or just playing a trick on his parents? But she was terribly pleased with the effect he was creating. What kind of work did you do? Arnold asked. A welder, Robert replied proudly. Dolores threw her hands up as if to chase away an illusion. The glass of water slipped from her hands and spilled all over her suit, but she didn't even notice. A friend of mine from university has a father who owns a company, and he got me a job there, Robert told his stunned parents. At first, I didn't believe in my own abilities, but David, my friend's dad, taught me everything. Then he even sent me to welding courses, by the way, at his own expense. Of course, I paid him back later. But how can this be? His mother whispered. She looked so upset that Betty felt a twinge of sympathy for her. How are you going to live? How will you feed your family if you don't have a higher education? Like hundreds, thousands, even millions of people around the world, Robert replied cheerfully. Not having a higher education doesn't mean life is over. On the contrary, it opens up a lot of other professions where a person can realize their potential. Do only people with diplomas know how to make money? Your grandparents will say that, Arnold sighed. Now it was his turn to clutch his heart. Cousin Aunt Lilith will never let us cross her threshold. Well, I'll survive somehow, Robert reassured them. I hope my grandparents will understand me. I've seen my cousin Aunt no more than 3 times in my life. I don't care about her opinion. He looked at Betty with tenderness. Betty, for example, accepts me as I am. She's not only beautiful but also smart. You should see how talented she is at painting. Betty couldn't help but smile. Her husband had never praised her to his parents before. Betty doesn't have a higher education, and so what? Robert continued. But she's married to a simple welder. And that's because we truly love each other. Robert. Dolores raised her voice. Tell me it's not true. Are you just playing a trick on us? Yes, son, tell us it's a joke. Arnold supported her. Unfortunately, no, Robert shrugged. I spoke the plain truth. We are disgraced. Robert proclaimed. This is a stain on our entire family. Listen, he addressed them. I don't understand why you're so alarmed. That's exactly why I hid the truth from you. I was afraid of this reaction. We couldn't even imagine in our worst nightmares that our son would resort to such a monstrous deception, his mother said with drama. How could you even think of such a thing? The father wondered. After all, we have instilled in you since childhood that higher education is the foundation of a good life. Stop, Robert interrupted him. I'm not refusing to get an education. When you struggled to find me a spot at this foreign institute, I humbly went there. But you overlooked one small but very important detail. What detail? Dolores asked. You didn't consider that it's impossible to pursue something you don't love, especially in a foreign country, when you're 20 years old and have so many plans and ideas in your head. What ideas are you talking about? Arnold asked, confused. Ideas like starting my own small business, for example, the son replied. Well, okay then, the father agreed. But what was stopping you from getting an education first? At first, I did want to enroll, Robert admitted, but I couldn't handle the academic load and failed my exams. Then you should have tried to enroll the following year, Dolores pointed out, or get an education here in our country. I couldn't do that. Robert shouted. I imagined your reaction and preferred to deceive you rather than listen to your reproaches. We would have been completely right. His mother shouted back. Everyone in our family has higher education going back 7 generations. If we confess to someone that you don't have a diploma, no one would understand us. We would become a laughingstock. Betty watched this spectacle wide-eyed. She couldn't imagine to what extent they were obsessed with higher education. Apparently, they were more concerned about their relatives' opinions than their son's actual knowledge and skills. It was hard for her to grasp the fact that someone today could seriously pay attention to diplomas rather than a person's professionalism. Meanwhile, Robert continued his argument. I'm really sorry it turned out this way, he said, sadness in his voice. I let you down, even if it wasn't intentional. How could you? His mother-in-law got up from the couch and started pacing the room. You're right. You really let us down, his father agreed with her. We'll think about what to do next, Dolores said, bringing a handkerchief to her eyes. I don't understand, Robert clarified. We can't lie to our relatives about your fake diploma, but we also can't pretend that everything is fine, Arnold agreed with his wife. I think we should take a little break and reduce our visits to your house. Yes, that would be better, Dolores confirmed. You are our son, and we love you. But the information you've given us came like a bolt from the blue. We weren't prepared for it. After these words, they began to gather their things to go home, without even touching the door. Betty looked at her husband in confusion. "What just happened?" she asked him. "Nothing special," he shrugged. "I just found out the true face of my parents." He turned away and walked to the window. Betty understood that her husband was truly upset about how Dolores and Arnold reacted to his lack of a higher education diploma. Can parental love really depend on that? Months passed, and they stopped visiting, preferring to call, and even then only on major holidays. If Betty answered the phone, they would hang up altogether. After some time, rumors reached them that Dolores and Arnold told all their relatives that their son ruined his life for her. At first, Robert was very upset when he revealed the truth to his parents. He never could have imagined the level of misunderstanding he would face. And Betty finally realized how hard it was for her husband in a family where the opinion of a distant aunt carried such weight. Robert and Betty truly loved each other and supported one another in everything, despite the differences in their social status.